Good day everyone. I will report which is about Marcos regime, the fall of dictatorship. So, introduction. President Ferdinand E. Marcos assumed power on December 13, 1965 and became the second president re-elected to office in 1969. There were efforts to maneuver the 1971 Constitutional Convention to permit his continuing in office. With the swell of student radicalization and increasing number of violent demonstrations, Marcos played up middle-class fears and used this to justify the imposition of martial law on September 23, 1972 by virtue of Proclamation Number 1081. Martial law was not just an invocation of the President's emergency powers under 1935 constitutions. Marcos went further to assume all governing powers included civilian courts and systematically replaced the 1935 constitution with the 1973 constitution for his own ends. The replacement of the constitution was done under dubious circumstances. First, Marcos ordered a viva voce plebiscite on January 10 to 15 on 1973, in which the voting age was reduced to 15 to ratify the new constitution. Military men were placed prominently to intimidate voters. Reports indicated that mayors and governors were given quotas for yes votes on the constitution, and negative votes were often not recorded. Result reports that 90% of the citizens have voted for the Constitution, even though some communities did not participate in the citizens' assemblies. Over the next few years, Marcos would hold for more plebiscites in 1973, 1975, 1976, and 1978 through citizen assemblies to legitimize the continuation of martial rule. Second, he coerced the Supreme Court into granting it. President Marcos was able to persuade the Supreme Court to uphold martial law and the new constitution by using the stick and carrot strategy on the justices. Before martial law was declared, about 8,000 people, including senators, civil libertarians, journalists, students, and labor leaders, were taken into custody without being given a fair trial. Many of them challenged the declaration's constitutionality by submitting habeas corpus petitions to the Supreme Court, but in Jabiliana v. Executive Secretary, the Supreme Court handed down its definitive ruling that effectively affirmed the Constitution. This would be the last ruling confirming martial law's constitutionality in Gr. Not at all L. 35546, the Supreme Court, September 17, 1974. The court denied habeas corpus petitions on the grounds that martial law was a political matter outside the purview of the court and that the 1973 Constitution superseded the 1935 Constitution in all respects. Martial law in the Philippines imposed government control over media, with periodicals padlocked and critics taken to Camp Crame. Marcos issued 11 presidential decrees suppressing press freedom, leading to threats, libel suits, and forced resignation. Most periodicals allowed were crony newspapers offering bootlicking reportage on the economy. This absolute rule had a clock of legality and contestability, but specific factors eventually led to the fall of the dictatorship and the restoration of democracy.
Factors that lead to the fall of dictatorship. Opposition to martial law in the 1970s, Marcos held in the issue of successions, the collapse of the Philippine economy, the failure of the snap election of 1986. Opposition of martial law in 1970s, popular anti-Marcos sentiment existed for the duration of martial law. According to David Werfel, there were three paramount types of opposition to martial law during 1970s: reformist opposition, revolutionary opposition, and religious opposition. Reformist opposition. The reformist opposition comprised of upper middle class members advocated political reforms using non-violent tactics. They were tolerated by Marcos as long as they could not replace him or gain mass support. 1978 was a watershed year for the opposition as it boycotted the interim batasang pabansang election. Senator Gerardo Roas refused to reactivate the Liberal Party due to Marcos' failure to address their concern. Reformist opposition. The Lakas ng Bayan Party, led by imprisoned former Senator Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., was the most prominent opposition movement in the IBP election. Despite initial apprehension, Aquino decided to run campaign from his jail cell and appearing for television interview. His candidacy inspired popular support, leading to a noise barrage in Metro Manila. However, Laban was shut out, with Marcos KBL winning 91% of the IBP seat, resulting in Marcos' victory.
Reformist opposition. In 1981, Marcos officially lifted martial law, but since all decrees issued during that time were still in force, the lifting was a merely symbolic gesture. In the June presidential elections of that year, he ran under the KBL, his main opponent being nationalist Aleo Santos. Unlike in the 1978 elections, the reformist opposition was united in its stance to boycott the polls, labeling it a sham after Marcos refused the condition they had previously proposed, such as a minimum campaign period, a purging of voters' lists, equal time and space for the opposition, and a reorganization of the Commission on Elections, COMELEC. Revolutionary opposition. The government's use of communist and secessionist threats to justify martial law in 1970s lead to the growth of political opposition and recruitment of the new People's Army in the Moro National Liberation Front, MNLF, in the provinces. The MNLF, formed by the students and politicians from Mindanao, aimed to create the Bangsamoro Republic. The Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, attempted to seize illegal firearms supplied by Libya, sparking a war that lasted from 1973 to 1977. Over 13,000 people were killed and over 1 million were displaced. The government spent $1 million a day to contain the rebellion. The Communist Party of the Philippines, CPP, emerged the stronger under Marcos' weakening dictatorship following the principle of centralized command, decentralized operations. It established autonomous regional chapters across the Philippines, allowing CPP cadres to experiment with local tactics and survive the loss of many original leaders. In November 1977, the armed forces captured Jose Maria Sison and other party leaders, leading to the disarray of the Communist Party. However, this victory was short-lived as the CPP's influence grew stronger within provinces. Because of the military's presence, the Communist Party of the Philippines, CPP, grew quickly in regions where there were many human rights violations. The CPP had a mass base of about 1 million people, a guerrilla army of 15,000 and cadres by the late 1970s. Despite high percentage of illiteracy, the communist soldiers could explain the reasons behind their fights and their motivations, unlike the EFP forces, who were more trained. The CPP organized trade unions and gained control over significant schools through the Kilusang Mayo Uno and the League of Filipino Students. They also forged partnerships with nationalist senators such as Loreno Tañada and Jose Diokno, who contributed to the validation and publicizing of allegations of human rights abuses by the Marcos administration. Religious opposition. Martial law faced opposition from the religious sector, with the Protestant churches protesting since 1972 and the Catholic Church supporting Marcos' anti-communism. The provincial clergy became the radicalized after witnessing the dictatorship's effects on the poor, leading to the formation of Christians for National Liberation. They used church social action programs to secure foreign fundings through private donors agencies, focusing on poverty alleviation and defending the poor against communism.
Religious opposition. Jaime Cardinal Sin, the Archbishop of Manila, condemned the summary of arrest of Jesuit Father Jose Blanco and Benigno Mayo in 1974. Sin presided over a prayer vigil for the detained priest, which was the largest anti-martial law protest at the time in 1975. Sin opposed a MARCOS decree banning labor strikes, but the prohibition was confined to strategic industries, church-owned media, including newspapers and radio stations, were shut down from 1976-1977. The government threatened to tax church properties and subject them to urban land reform, since critical collaboration policy gave way to active resistance, leading to religious indignation and clergy radicalization in 1978. Protestant groups rallied against Marcos, and by 1979, Sin was on his way to his role in the overthrow of Marcos. Marcos' health and the issue of succession. In 1979, President Marcos' health began to deteriorate with his assassination of Ninoy Aquino, causing widespread awareness. By mid-November 1984, Marcos' health worsened, and his Minister of Labor, Blas Opel, revealed the situation. October 28, 1985, Marcos was diagnosed with systemic lupus erythematosus, an incurable recurring sickness, further complicated by his diabetes. This situation was revealed by congressional and U.S. intelligence sources.
In 1981, the plebiscite ratified a constitutional amendment creating the Executive Committee, consisting of 14 members, half of whom were assemblymen. The committee was created to provide a stepping stone for future leadership and a high-level training ground for the future prime ministers and presidents. The committee member who performed the best was believed to be Marcos' successors, as no member of the administration of Kilusang Bagong Lipunan could take over in case of his death, resignation, and incapacitation. Contenders for the presidency started positioning themselves to gain the upper hand. For instance, there were attempts to discredit Prime Minister Cesar Virata and the programs associated with the economic technocrats, while Imelda Marcos strove to repair her tarnished image, especially in the provinces, while pushing her son Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos further into the public eye. Marcos' health deteriorated, necessitating clear successor guidelines. A 1984 plebiscite abolished the executive committee and restored the vice president's office for 1987 elections. The Speaker of Batasang Pambansa was designated as acting president in case of a vacated presidency. Economist James Boyce criticized the Philippine development strategy during the Marcos era, stating that it was a failure in reducing poverty. Despite the implementation of three strategies, the Green Revolution in agriculture, growth and diversity in agricultural and forestry exports, and massive external borrowing, the profits were disproportionately distributed to the wealthiest, leading to a significant income disparity. Higher rice yields in agriculture saved land for export crops and foreign exchange for non-rice imports. But these gains didn't benefit the poor. Government intervention, cronyism, and monopolization of agricultural markets such as sugar and coconut were prevalent, with operations not audited.
The collapse of the Philippine economy. During the Marcos regime, sugar was the Philippines' second most important export. Sugarcane plantations doubled in the mid-1970s but did not increase harvest and profit, leading to a decline in 1974. A government sugar monopoly was established to participate in world trade. Trading responsibilities were transferred to Philsocom and Natsura, respectively after the market decline. Benedicto, under his chairmanship, granted Philsocom the power to buy, sell, and set sugar prices, take over mining companies, and establish the Republic Planters Bank, which became the sugar industry's main finance source. Benedicto was accused of using his position to forge an economic fiefdom and gain political influence. The sugar marketing monopoly in the Philippines significantly impacted the economy. Protecting the interests of sugar hacienderos close to Marcos, small landowners suffered widespread starvation, leading to international media coverage. Large-scale sugar owners grew resentful of Marcos due to the monopoly and land grabbing. The end of Marcos' regime saw the Philippines' sugar industry nearly collapse. Starting in 1973, the Philippine Coconut Authority or PCA monopolized export of coconuts and increased coconut tax to stabilize market prices. During the Marcos era, a single entity controlled coconut marketing and production. This monopoly was enabled by presidential decrees, levies on production, and the establishment of a bank. The main beneficiaries were Eduardo Cuanco and Juan Ponce Enrile, the Coconut King. Foreign loans were initially intended for the Philippine domestic investment and infrastructure development, but were primarily diverted to private companies under Marcos cronies, reducing the quality and quantity of domestic investments. The rest were diverted to foreign banks. The Bataan nuclear power plant, built for $1.2 billion, never generated electricity, causing economic backlash for the poor, middle class, and wealthy.
Collapse of the Philippine economy. In 1973, Marcos envisioned the Philippines having a nuclear power plant due to his vision of a modern nation. However, the project faced challenges such as power generation for only 15,000 of Luzon's population, security concerns due to 4 active volcanoes, and the country's poor economic and technological status. Only Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea were building nuclear power plants in East Asia. The power plant was the largest and most expensive construction project in the Philippines' history, making funding impossible from the government's treasury. In 1975, the Export-Import Bank approved $277 million in direct loans and $367 million in loan guarantees, the largest loan package the bank had approved anywhere. Westinghouse Electric initially submitted a $8,500 million bid for 2 plants, while General Electric submitted detailed costs and specifications. Marcos awarded the contract to Westinghouse, while later submitted a $1.2 billion proposal for 1 reactor, nearly 400% higher than the original bid. Marcos was guaranteed a cut of nearly $80 million, which Westinghouse used through Marcos' crony, Herminio Decini. The old economic elite, referred to as the oligarchy, initially tolerated the administration's favoritism towards crony companies. However, in 1981, Dewey D., a Filipino-Chinese businessman, left the country for Canada, leaving 600 million pesos in debt. Government banks announced a 5 billion peso rescue fund, causing public criticism. The Marcos administration faced a loss of support due to economic impoverishment, which led to human rights violations and recruitment by rebel groups. The Moro National Liberation Front, or MNLF, increased in strength from 6,900 to 20,000 regulars in 1978, while the new People's Army formed 26 guerrilla fronts and attracted 40,000 mass activists.
The failure of snap election of 1986. In November 1985, President Marcos announced his intention to call for a snap election, inviting U.S. Congress to observe, and dismissing a fraud accusation. This was attempting to show the legitimacy of the Marcos administration and consolidate support. The announcement was ahead of schedule with the next regular election scheduled for 1987. The president was overconfident disregarding the objection of his family, cabinet, and party, and First Lady Imelda Marcos was taken back. Marcos had to consolidate his force if the election should go to his favor. As it was before the declaration of martial law, Marcos needed the support of the military while acting Chief of Staff General Fidel B. Ramos was the next in line as the Chief of Staff. The President known that she needed Fabian Berbach. Ber was on leave as she was being prosecuted in the Aquino-Gelman murder case by December 2, 1985. Ber and 26 other suspects were acquitted in a legal decision that caused public outrage. Before the snap election announced, a convener group was formed to select the opposition presidential candidate. Cory Aquino was considered the people's choice and promoted by Jimmy Cardinalson. To avoid being left out, Salvador Laurel of the United Nationalist Democratic Organization and Iba Calao formed the National Unification Committee or NUC. Laurel was nominated by the NUC for the snap election.
The failure of snap election of 1986. Cory Aquino announced her intention to run for president in a snap election, gaining support from 1 million citizens. The opposition had two frontrunners, Aquino and former Senator Salvador Doy Laurel. Laurel, initially reluctant, eventually agreed to run as Aquino's vice president, believing their tandem would help against Marcos and the KBL's influence. Businessman Jose Concepcion headed a group of concerned citizens to revive the National Movement of Free Elections, or NAMFREL, established in 1957 after the fraud of the 1949 presidential election. As the citizens' watchdog on the counting of votes, it had a successful run in the legislative elections of 1984. Releasing an unofficial and tampered count, KBL attempted to discredit NAMFREL, but due to international pressure, COMELEC gave the watchdog organization official observer status. On February 7, 1986, massive poll fraud and cheating impacted the 1986 elections in the Philippines. Thousands of registered voters were missing from the list, leading to 850 foreign correspondents and U.S. senators and congressmen observing. 35 COMELEC employees and computer operators protested the discrepancy between computer tabulation and tally board, demonstrating blatant manipulation of electoral results. NAMFREL showed Aquino in the lead with almost 70% of the votes canvassed. The opposition held a Tagumpay ng Bayan rally in Luneta, where Aquino called for civil disobedience and boycott of Marcos-owned companies. The Aquino-Laurel ticket declared victory, while the international observer delegation reported anomalies in election results and voter intimidation, highlighting the election's instability.
The failure of snap election of 1986. On February 25, President Marcos' inauguration was chosen, but none of the diplomatic corps sent congratulatory remarks except for Soviet Ambassador Vadim Shabalin. When Marcos informed him of the election result, Shabalin offered his compliments, a grave diplomatic error that alarmed the administration. In 1986, Marcos sent Labor Minister Blas Oppal and Executive Secretary Alejandro Melchor to the U.S. J.V. Cruz and Presidential Assistant for General Government Jacobo Clave to Europe, Roberto Benedicto and Arturo Tolentino to Japan and ASEAN countries, and San Miguel Corporation fell in the stock market due to Cory Aquino's boycott of crony companies. Conclusion: from February 22 to 25, 1986, thousands of people gathered at EDSA in Metro Manila to demand the peaceful ouster of dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Corazon C. Aquino and Salvador H. Laurel took their oaths while Marcos was inaugurated and addressed in Maharlika Hall. Despite defections and popular support, Marcos was forced to leave for exile in Hawaii, ending his 2-decade dictatorial rule. In March 1986, President Marcos planned to stage bombing and arson operation in Manila to impose martial law. Operation Everlasting, he aimed to neutralize opposition by arresting opposition leaders, the NAMFREL, Executive Council, and ram rebels in a concentration camp. This EDSA People Power Revolution prevented a resumption of oppression rule.